Hello, and welcome to Rough Edges. I'm your host, Sarah Fox. In this podcast, I will guide you through my faith and mental health journey to dispel the stigma surrounding mental illness and to create a voice for those who wish to discover more about these topics. This podcast will not only shed light on mental health issues, but will also reveal the intersection between faith and mental illness. I pray that these themes will bring growth and healing to our communities. Hello, and welcome back to Rough Edges. I hope you enjoyed last week's introductory episode. In this week's episode, I'm going to share more about my mental health journey. I will also explore various aspects of bipolar disorder, such as the symptoms, types, and appropriate treatment plans. This episode is by no means a substitute for treatment. It is merely for educational purposes. If you need help, try to seek counsel from a professional, which includes a therapist, psychologist, or psychiatrist. Before we get into the episode, I want to share my highs and lows for the week. Let's start with the lows. I was exhausted for most of the week as the demands for work kept coming. I'm able to manage it, but it gives me anxiety, which played a role in how much sleep I got this week. I'm also not writing as much as I used to. I try not to pressure myself into creating something, but I can't help but place these expectations on myself. That's all about to change. I'm sure I'll start writing again. I just need to give it more time. Now on to the highs. I got to reconnect with some friends this week. I got to have a much needed conversation with a friend from college, and we shared our hearts with each other, which made my night even better. I also got to connect with a friend from my old job. We kept in touch and we were able to catch up with one another, which was very refreshing. It was also great to hear how well she was doing at her job. This week was also Veterans Day, and I got to spend the day with my family, which was much needed after a long day at work the previous day. All in all, life is going well, and I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything else in the world. Now, without further ado, let's get into today's episode. I wanted to frame this discussion by doing an in-depth analysis of bipolar disorder. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 21 years old. I got my diagnosis in January of this year. Once I was diagnosed, I wanted to learn as much as I could about bipolar disorder. I also wanted to know what to expect during my various episodes, cycles, and behavioral patterns. So, what is bipolar disorder, and what are the symptoms? According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, specifically the 5th edition, or DSM-5 for short, bipolar disorder is a mood disorder. It is separate from depressive disorders, borderline personality disorder, and schizophrenia. Although these symptoms often overlap, bipolar disorder specifically affects changes in mood. Bipolar disorder affects the chemicals in the brain, which causes shifts in mood, which are not often normal responses to external events. It is also a genetically transmitted illness that leads to difficulty in controlling strong emotions, such as extreme happiness, otherwise known as mania, and extreme sadness, otherwise known as depression. In 1980, bipolar disorder was known as manic depressive disorder and was often described as a person having symptoms of both depression and mania. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, bipolar disorder affects approximately 5.7 million adult Americans, or about 2.6% of the U.S. population age 18 and older every year. The study goes on to say that the median age of onset for bipolar disorder is 25 years old, although the illness can start in early childhood or as late as the 40s and 50s. Another component of the study, which I found very interesting, was the fact that more than 2/3 of people with bipolar disorder have at least one close relative with the illness or with unipolar major depression, indicating that the disease has a hereditable component. This shows that the illness is very common and that most people struggle with it more than we realize. In light of this definition and these statistics, what are the symptoms of bipolar disorder? According to Take Charge of Bipolar Disorder, which is a very profound resource, by the way, the central features of bipolar disorder involve noticeable difficulties in controlling emotions and the periodic eruption of intense mood episodes. Although most of these difficulties stem from stress or traumatic events, bipolar disorder is still a biological illness which alters a person's brain chemistry. These chemical alterations cause sudden shifts in mood. Most bipolar disorder symptoms are measured by mania or depression. So, what is mania? There are two types of mania in bipolar disorder. There is full-blown mania, which describes having manic symptoms which last for more than 1 week. I experienced full-blown mania, and some of the symptoms that I experienced included feeling great no matter what happened, decreased need for sleep. That included feeling fully rested after 3 hours of sleep or not sleeping at all, racing thoughts, increased goal planning. To give you an idea, I was making plans for myself for 5 years into the future. Rapid speech, I was talking at unprecedented speeds, and I was highly distractible. These are only a few of the symptoms that someone would experience during full-blown mania. The other type of mania is hypomania. Hypomania is described as an abnormal or persistently elevated, expansive, or irritable mood that lasts from 1 to 4 days. Although hypomania and full-blown mania have similarities, hypomania is usually not severe enough to warrant hospitalization. So, what is depression? Another component of bipolar symptoms is depression. Depression is much more than just sadness. According to the DSM-5, depression is described as a depressed or weary mood lasting most of the day for a period of at least 2 weeks. For me, I had a major depressive episode. Some of the symptoms I experienced included sadness, unhappiness, feelings of despair, irritability or frustration, pessimistic thinking, suicidal thoughts, lack of energy, anxiety, feeling easily overwhelmed, oversensitivity, and inability to make a decision. These are just a few of the vast array of symptoms of depression. It is also a very common mental illness that affects many people. I urge you to seek help if you've experienced at least 3 or more of these symptoms. Getting help is often the first step to transformational healing. Stay tuned for more about the types of bipolar disorder and more about my story. Welcome back. So before I get into more of my own story, I want to discuss the various types of bipolar disorder. Bipolar 1. For decades, bipolar 1 disorder was described as having severe depressions and severe mania. These episodes would last from a few weeks to a few months. People with this diagnosis, such as myself, can go for several months while feeling and acting normal. Years would pass by with no changes in mood, and then an episode would emerge. These patterns of discrete mood changes are common to people with bipolar type 1 or euthymia, as many mental health professionals call it. I was diagnosed with this disorder due to the severity of my mood changes and episodes. For a time, I was rapid cycling, or experiencing episodes one after the other for a year or more. Needless to say, when I found out about my diagnosis, I was not happy. I mean, who would be? Finding out that you have a life-changing illness is not an easy pill to swallow. We'll get back to that in a moment. Bipolar 2. Bipolar 2 disorder is a version of bipolar where there are two dominant mood swings, depression and hypomania. Unlike bipolar 1, there is no full-blown mania. Hypomanic episodes usually last for 1 to 3 days, though some people experience months of hypomania. The most challenging aspect of bipolar 2 is depression. According to Take Charge, bipolar 2 patients can spend 3 times as many days in depression than do bipolar 1 patients. Rapid cycling is also more common in bipolar 2 than bipolar 1. Some people can go for years with bipolar 2 before it is diagnosed. It's often mistaken as unipolar depression. Bipolar 3, cyclothymia, and hyperthymia. Other types of bipolar disorder include bipolar 3, which is described as numerous major depressive episodes and short period of wellness, but no mania. Cyclothymia, which is described as a low-grade form of bipolar disorder. It has cycles of mild depression and hypomania. And hyperthymia, which is described as long-term hypomanic behavior. A person with this type has rapid speech, high energy, and a decreased need for sleep. When learning about bipolar disorder, I had no idea that there were this many types. I hope that you found this helpful for you or a loved one who is dealing with this illness. Stay tuned for more of my story coming up soon. Now for my story. As mentioned in my introductory episode, I received my diagnosis while I was in the hospital. A nurse handed me a packet which explained all about bipolar disorder. I sat in my room with many thoughts running through my mind. One of them being, Lord, how is this possible? Being assigned a treatment team didn't make things better. Having to end my relationship with my therapist at the time to get a new one was a blow that I just couldn't take. I was assigned to a new agency, and to say that I dreaded my first session was an understatement. I felt like my voice wasn't heard. Not only did the therapist not listen to me, she also never made time to schedule a session. I met my current therapist through an intake session. She was filling in for my assigned therapist at the time, and we got along really well. She helped and is still helping me realize that I need to be more gracious to myself during this journey. I also had to get a new doctor who kept prescribing high dosages of medicine, which left me feeling drowsy and falling asleep everywhere. After months of searching, I finally found a doctor through a family friend, and now I can say that I feel heard and seen. She even gives me advice according to my faith during our sessions. So, how did the diagnosis affect my view of self? I want to go into more detail about how the diagnosis affected my sense of self. As I mentioned earlier, getting my diagnosis was not an easy thing to handle. I had no idea how to navigate having a mental illness, and I was definitely not prepared to experience a new level of functionality. I was used to functioning at the highest level, or at least I expected myself to. Now that my edges are rough, I've had to contend with a new way of living. Finding a balance in your mental health journey can be difficult. I think John McManey put it in the best way in his book called Living Well with Depression and Bipolar Disorder. He states, What we are now learning about the brain is truly mind-boggling, but psychiatry still remains more of an art than a science. Treatments tend to be hit or miss, and patients can endure weeks and months and even years of frustration and heartbreak before striking oil. Depression and bipolar disorder are treatable, but getting help is not as straightforward as simply throwing Prozac or lithium down the hatch. Conversely, a much maligned remedy may be your salvation. I learned that although treatment is hard to get used to initially, my bipolar disorder doesn't define who I am as a person, and my life isn't over. God is still writing my story. As I close, I'd like to share some lyrics from a song that continues to touch my heart to this day. That song is called Still That Girl by Britt Nicole. It says, "You were young, you were free, and you dared to believe you could be the girl who could change the world. Then your life took a turn and you fell and it hurt, but you're still that girl and you're gonna change this world." This song speaks to me so much because it reminds me that I'm still the same girl that I was before. Although life threw me a curveball with this diagnosis, I'm still able to achieve my dreams. God is still with me, and I'm still his daughter. My identity never changed, which makes it a little easier to accept this diagnosis. I encourage you that life doesn't stop if you're having unexpected difficulties. You can still experience the joy of fulfilling your dreams and the healing that comes with the right treatment plan and support groups. On the next episode, we'll discuss the importance of therapy and why finding support groups are essential for treating mental illness. Tune in next week for more on Rough Edges. Thank you for listening to Rough Edges. Feel free to follow this podcast on Instagram at rough.edges.podcast or visit my blog at sarahifox.com. If you have any questions or further suggestions on how to make this podcast grow, you can email at rough.edges.podcast@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening and have a wonderful day.